Welcome, everybody. Please take your seats. We're going to get started in just a second. My name is Stuart DeCue. I'm the Executive Director of the Yale Center for Business and the Environment, a joint initiative of the School of Management and the School of the Environment. And it's been a privilege to help organize and lead, working with Yale Ventures, the climate track of this event. And when we think about the climate crisis and the economic transformation and our response to it, it can sometimes be a little difficult to wrap your head around. Where do we start? What are the points of intervention? How do we begin? What are the ways that we can begin to work on this? And what we wanted to let you in on in this keynote is an ongoing 3-decade conversation, friendship, and relationship that's been working at this. We have Yale alumni who met here, different classrooms, rooms around campus, and began thinking about how do we make this transformation possible. And through multiple experiments in policy, in changing of finance, in developing new business models, in all sorts of different places and organizations, some of the most prominent in and around the country and the world, Elliot and Daniel are two of the people that have been working for 3 decades, talking with each other, engaging, considering how this can be done, and you get let in on a conversation that they've been having over that period of time about where those points of intervention are. This discussion is also moderated by a person who I think, if you think about innovation in the state of Connecticut and you don't know someone like Bryan Garcia, he is literally the spirit, heart, and soul of a new model of finance. Bryan has developed and done things at the state of Connecticut by launching the Green Bank movement that people literally did not think were possible. Taking small amounts of public dollars, leveraging massive amounts of private capital, and most importantly, imbuing it with a sense of purpose on how we can do this in a just and equitable way across all communities. If there's somebody who can reimagine what the system looks like and infuse dollars into it and figure out how to pull the best out of our incredibly expert panelists, there's no better person than Bryan. So these people have all been incredibly generous with us and to Yale over periods of time, mentored, supported, and engaged with a range of students, and they're great teachers. And so we're deeply appreciative that they're taking the time to work with us here and have this conversation with you. And Bryan, turning it over to you.
All right, I have to say that I'm a little jittery as we're getting going here because I was looking at my email coming in and it looks like the 48E tax credits came out for low income. So okay. I'm really, really excited to dig into that 35 pages of low income tax credits. But just wanted to thank Stuart and the team for the Center for Business and the Environment. You're doing great things, preparing environmental leaders for business and society. Josh Jabal, we miss you, brother. At the state, you're doing fantastic things and just continue to make all of our lives better. So just a big kudos to you, Josh. We miss you. So today we really have the privilege of being with two phenomenal leaders. I'm really excited to do this today, and I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves, but I wanted to give you a few pieces of Elliot Mainzer and Daniel Gross. Elliot is leading a nonprofit public benefit corporation called the California Independent System Operator, or CAL-ISO. Just to give you a sense, the state of California is the 5th largest economy in the world at $3.3 trillion in GDP, behind US, China, Japan, and Germany. And Daniel is leading the venture arm of a for-profit corporation called the Climate Pledge Fund for a little company called Amazon, which is the 5th largest in the world also, at $1.2 trillion market cap, behind Apple, the Saudi Aramco, Microsoft, and Google. So you could imagine what a great group here today. So what we're going to explore is how clean energy and climate tech are transforming the economy. And my role is to really be the moderator of the conversation. We're going to get to a point here where we may have some Q&A from all of you, so begin to think about some really pushing the envelope types of issues, because I think that's what we're going to try to dig in today. I'm going to throw a topic out there and see how they wrestle with it with all of you. So the format is I'm going to provide some context. We're going to have the panelists introduce themselves briefly. Then we're going to get into this conversation. We're going to delve into 3 specific areas. We're going to think about the near-term greenhouse gas emission reduction targets, commercially available technologies, and look at electrifying everything. We're going to then get into zero carbon generation. You could imagine there's a lot of things in all of this. And then we're going to try to wrap it up with advancing new technologies. And I think we've got a few cool issues there for you to wrestle with. And then we'll open it up to audience Q&A. So totally prepare for some of those questions that you have on your mind that you want to really push the envelope on. So on setting the context, I want to focus on two things. The first thing is that we finally have a federal partner in all of this. You know, state and local governments have been at this for a long time, and businesses have been at this for a long time. But we now have a federal partner in President Biden who is moving the public policy agenda on climate justice in this country. And second is around relationships. How experiences here at Yale through the joint degree program. Both of our panelists here received joint degrees from the School of Management and the Yale School of the Environment. So how that has shaped their career trajectories. I want you to look and watch how they interact because they're actually classmates. So in terms of the federal partnership, I had the privilege of serving as part of the Biden-Harris transition team, ascertaining the Department of Energy, specifically the Loan Program Office. We were trained to understand the incoming administration's public policy foundations across government. So this wasn't just a policy about the DOE, the EPA, or the Department of Transportation. This was about Interior, Treasury, across government, and it was a climate justice platform for the administration. That involved two things. First is decarbonization. So when you think about that, achieving a zero carbon electric sector by 2035. And secondly, achieving a carbon neutral economy by 2050. So decarbonization. The second one was about justice, ensuring a just transition. So as we move away from fossil fuels, ensuring that those families and businesses have a place to land with family sustaining jobs and labor jobs, as well as Justice 40, ensuring that no less than 40% of investment and benefits inure to low-income and disadvantaged communities. That's why the IRS ruling today is really important. On relationships, I was looking at the timeline. You both graduated in 1998, so this is your 25th anniversary, really like literally to the day, right?
Wow, how did that?
So you completed that 25 years ago, and obviously a lot has happened over that period of time, but there were three things that I wanted to bring up that were happening at the time you were graduating, because they may have been influential in terms of what you were thinking about and where you were planning to go. The first thing is that the second assessment of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change came out with their second assessment report. And in that report, it said that it is very likely that humans have caused climate change. And I think we all remember like that whole debate of did humans do it or not? You know, so that was the report that really set that context. The second thing that happened in that year was the third conference of the parties in Kyoto, Japan, led to the Kyoto Protocol, which established legally binding greenhouse gas emission reduction targets, which the US didn't ratify. And then lastly, 1998 at that time was the warmest year on record ever. Since then, we've had 12 record-setting years over that 25-year period. So it was a really important period of time. So I want to start there with each of you. Elliot, maybe we'll start with you just in terms of introducing yourself to this audience, who you are, who you work for, what your roles and responsibilities are. We'll do that with Daniel, and then we'll open the conversation.
Thanks, Bryan. Hard to believe it's been 25 years, and the energy and the pure pleasure of being around the Yale community has just never abated, and it's hard to believe. And Daniel, so great to see you, my friend. You know, I've been an inveterate grid guy since it all started. I came to Yale back in the late 1990s, interested in the transformation of the power sector and the renewable energy revolution. And here, 25 years later, I'm now the CEO of the California Independent System Operators. You mentioned it's a 501c3 public benefit corporation that basically has the responsibility of maintaining reliability for about 80% of the grid in California. And of course, this is happening at a time where the state has taken on a monumental goal of decarbonizing effectively the entire economy by 2045, which implicates an incredible amount of new resource coming on board, an incredible amount of new transmission infrastructure, fundamental transformation of the way that we get electricity in California, a huge push into energy storage. And so our goal, taking the policy proclivities of California and the reliability into the grid, is to maintain that constant balancing and to make sure that the energy market is structured in a way that can provide the right incentives for all the new technology, that we can interface effectively with distributed energy resources, more at the retail side of the meter, and increasingly to try to regionalize the grid in the West. I really think about, I'm really a child of the Western United States, and I really think about the West as an integrated grid. California ISO is in the process right now, and actually involved in a competition to open up our energy market across the West and to leverage the incredible resource diversity and transmission connectivity that exists across that geography, and ultimately to evolve towards a regional transmission organization. So a fascinating time to be part of it, and Daniel has been a huge influencer on my thinking all along, and it's just great again to be here with you, my friend. And Bryan, great to see you, of course, and thanks for convening us.
Well, we're going to get, I want to get into, in a bit, the September 2022 heat wave, because I think the way you all dealt with that was fascinating. Daniel.
Sure. So awesome to be up here with the two of you. 25 or more like 27 years ago when Elliot and I, well, I guess 28 years ago is when we met, we had like a vision and a plan that we were going to go forward. At some point, we were going to regroup and build wind farms in India. I think like we thought that that was definitely the future. And I think that we were a few years ahead of our time, but maybe final chapter, we can go and do that. So I'm director of the Amazon Climate Pledge Fund, which is a $2 billion, or actually we're managing a bit more than that now, but initially seeded with $2 billion by Amazon as a corporate venture capital fund. And the idea actually goes back to the Intergovernmental Panel, if I may, where Jeff Bezos and Christina Figueres were having a conversation. I think they got together like over coffee. And Christina was bemoaning that if we wait until the 2050 target to be net zero under the Paris Accord, it's too late. And so what could be done to accelerate? And the two of them came up with, well, what if companies could volunteer, major emitters could volunteer to be net zero 10 years early by 2040? And Jeff said, okay, we'll do it. And Bezos didn't have a plan, right? And now we're Amazon. We deliver more packages than FedEx or UPS every day, truly. We operate an airline, a cargo airline, that is bigger than most of the European flagship carriers. It's like 100 767s delivering packages. We operate more data centers than anyone else, use packaging material. We are driving trucks in like every neighborhood that you can ever imagine. The amount of fuel that we consume, buildings that we build, steel, concrete, all of it, enormous carbon emissions, and we need some kind of solution. And so the idea for the Climate Pledge Fund was we shouldn't just be waiting around until 2040 for someone to come up with a hydrogen-powered aircraft that's going to work for Amazon Air. We should be engaging with those companies, those entrepreneurial startups and later stage businesses early, backing them with capital, but also backing them with our feedback, our co-development, anchor orders, right? More important than actually investing money is showing some kind of commercial traction so that they can actually build, get feedback, and get money from people other than us. And so the idea was to invest in companies that have technologies that can help Amazon on its mission to be net zero by 2040. And that's my job.
Wow, I can't even imagine like being in the classroom 25 years ago and watching these two in the classroom. And the question that comes to my mind is like, as you guys looked across the room and we're thinking ahead, like, and you were thinking about Daniel, Elliot, and Daniel, you were thinking about Elliot. What were you thinking about him, 25 years ago? Like where is he gonna land?
So he went to Enron. It's funny, I can give you Elliot's background, maybe he'll give you mine. Elliot went to Enron, and at first I was scratching my head, and then Elliot built at Enron a green energy trading desk, just persuaded them that they should do it. And then I watched as Enron imploded and many of its practices were revealed, the heartbreak that Elliot really experienced from having believed in the mission of an organization and believed in the good that he can do, and in seeing what he had been a part of and where it went. And his career pivot was fascinating. I didn't really get Enron at first, and I would say one of the things that I didn't get about Elliot is he was so deep in energy. Sometimes he would talk and I just would have to nod my head and try to keep up with him because I just, I couldn't fully grasp the depth of his knowledge of grid, of technology, of balancing.
All right, Elliot. Now's your.
He's already confessed for my sins. Thanks, Daniel. Yeah,
Sure.
no, I was the lamb to the slaughter, straight to Enron right out of school. But you have to remember, this was a period we were in the very early stage. There had been a lot of policy that had been laid down in the 1970s, PERPA and some of the early FERC policy. But this was really 1996, 1997. This was really the dawn of the era of electricity restructuring in California and in the United States. And this was the beginnings of what we could see very early was going to be potentially an unbelievable growth curve. And I remember early listening to Daniel, it took us so little time to congeal around that vision of building wind projects. I wrote my master's thesis at Yale on how to basically sell wind energy in the California electricity market. So we were just grinding together, and I was so impressed. And I remember at one point, it was probably like about a year and a half in, I remember calling my dad home, and I remember saying to my dad, and this was really directly inspired by Dan, I said, Dad, my friends are going to change the world. and I was just so proud and just honored to be around such cool people. And to this day, we're really lucky. We had an amazing joint degree class that came out in '99. We're all such great friends. I'll let Daniel tell the story because he was the progenitor of the Green Davos idea.
Yeah, this is super cool and something that, we would encourage. We sort of hoped that other classes would learn about it and follow. But there was a core of us who were in related areas around sustainability, clean energy, et cetera, who had stayed in touch over the years. I don't know, it was maybe 10 years after graduation-ish. One of the members of our cohort was building, what was it? It was like a green utopian resort in the Catskills, and he and his wife and baby were living up in a house that honestly it looked like Jack Nicholson in The Shining, where we're there, and he invited all of us up there for just a summit, and we dubbed it Green Davos, and the idea was for everyone to bring some kind of problem that we were working on. And I remember like Charlotte Kaiser from the Nature Conservancy was there trying to figure out if she could raise a bond. Like that's what we were, and so it was just raise the idea and let's be there for each other in a supportive way to listen, talk, and help each other. And it just continues to echo. And I think the value and power of these cohorts and of the network and loyalty.
I remember watching that. You all invited me. I was with the Center for Business and the Environment at the time, and I got to watch all of you interact in that way. And it was beyond professional. It was personal. Like you all really shared a bond that was just awesome to watch. But I don't know, Elliot, you had.
No, it's a wonderful. It's really a wonderful part of my life, to be honest with you. I cherish these friendships, and actually just listening to the last panel, the climate panel, wow, what a group of superstars. And just, Daniel being part of their education and just the passion and the intelligence and just the go get it. I'm just proud to be part of the community. It's cool.
So we're privileged, right? I mean, we have this institution, we study here, we interact, we engage, we have lifelong relationships, we share all of that. So let's get into the decarbonization part, and let's start to look at the near-term goal of 2035 and trying to get to a zero carbon electric sector. And I think what we'll start off with just is the electrify everything notion. The EPA recently came out with its greenhouse gas inventory for 2021, and I think we're at about 6,500 million metric tons of emissions for 2021. That is 17% below 2005 levels. We know that the nationally determined contributions here in the US is 50 to 52% reductions from 2005 levels. Just to give some comparison, here in Connecticut, we're at 35 million metric tons versus 6,500. So we're about 0.5% of the national emissions. We represent 1% of the population. But like the U.S., transportation is our #1 emitting sector. So it's the biggie. It's 40%. It's 28% nationally, 40% in Connecticut. The #2 is the electric power sector, nationally at 25% of emissions. Here in Connecticut, it's 15%. So we're, our #2 is the residential sector and looking at how to decarbonize how we heat our homes. So let's dig in a little bit on the transportation side. Before we get to decarbonizing the grid, let's talk about transportation first. What are you all seeing there in terms of innovative new ideas, models, because all of this load has to go somewhere on an antiquated system. What are you seeing?
Sure, I'll start. And as Amazon, we know a thing or two about transportation, right? We've got a lot of vehicles on the road. So the way we think about transportation is last mile, middle mile, and the global mile. And maybe I'll start closest to home. Last mile, how do we get packages to your door? There, electrify everything is the way that we're going. So we made a commitment to purchase 100,000 electric delivery vans produced by Rivian in my home state of Illinois. And hopefully many of you are starting to see those on the roads. We've been taking delivery over the course of the year. And not surprisingly, I mean, if you can think of kind of why Amazon financially might want to build a climate pledge fund and be investing in some of these things, if we're going to place an order for 100,000 electric delivery vans, we're contributing an awful lot of value to Rivian, right? When they IPO, they're telling the story of that Amazon endorsement. It would be foolish not to invest in Rivian. So we do have a significant amount of Rivian in our portfolio as well. Yeah, and actually as a venture investor, this is actually one of the super cool things that we're able to do in the Climate Pledge Fund. We can engage with really early stage startups, like $1 million investment in a Series A or a seed, or we can put like over $1 billion into Rivian. The barbell is just crazy wide. We can do anything.
Bring them right into the business model.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
So last mile, electrify. Middle mile, a little more challenging, right? You've got to drive 500 miles a day carrying heavy load. And there, we're on the fence. I think there are people within Amazon who believes that battery technology will get you there, but there's just so much waste in hauling heavy batteries. They also take up a lot of space, and we're moving cargo. And when you're driving 500 miles in a day, you don't have time to stop and recharge, even a fast charge. And so I think that the solution is actually going to wind up being either hydrogen-based or some kind of liquid fuel. And so here, I will also bring us to the electrify everything, because we need a drop-in replacement for liquid fuels. You can look to like renewable diesel or renewable natural gas coming from dairy farms and landfills. The trouble is, like, the amount of used cooking oil or soybean oil or landfill methane that's available will not cover like a tiny portion of on-road vehicular traffic. And so to get a liquid fuel drop-in solution for global mile is going to be an electrofuel, right? It's going to be something that is using renewable energy to power an electrolyzer to split hydrogen from oxygen in water and then recombine that hydrogen into and recombine it into some kind of hydrocarbon, right? And so we backed a company called Infinium that's doing that, building their first commercial plant. We're buying everything that they build for our middle mile. The thing is, it's going to use a huge amount of renewable energy. Like, you think the amount just to decarbonize the grid is high? Wait until we're using wind and solar to put liquid fuels into everything. And then how do we deal with the global mile? Global mile, we fly a lot of airplanes. We are one of the largest users of marine cargo shipping in the world. Bunker oil is about as bad as it gets. And I think that in the next couple of years, we'll probably be the largest user of marine cargo shipping. And I think that that's probably going to be green methanol. And my bet is on electrofuel again. And so, man, it's a lot of strain on the grid. And Elliot can tell you about what electrifying fuels is going to do to our
Zero carbon by 2040. Oh my goodness.
Zero carbon, net zero.
What about all that load coming on, like whether it's electrolysis or whether it's the batteries coming onto the system, what does all that do to the system?
Yeah, just to give a couple of numbers. So just a few weeks ago, at the ISO, we produced a 10-year transmission plan, just looking out to about 2032, 2033. And we had a base case scenario that had us having to bring 40,000 megawatts of new electricity resources on board. And then there was a high electrification scenario, which included many of those uses, including some uncertainties about what's going to show up, that was 70 gigawatts, okay? So there is not only an enormous amount of demand that's coming onto the grid, but tremendous uncertainty about how it's going to show up. And for us on the bulk grid, it sort of shows up as aggregate megawatts, just sheer demand. The distribution utilities that are actually managing the lower voltage parts of the system have an incredible planning challenge to get ahead of that. What does that mean for the different neighborhoods? What does that mean for transformers at local residences? Where are you going to put the charging infrastructure? And then we have to figure out from an infrastructure planning perspective, where are there going to be the big nodes of interface between the distribution grid and the transmission grid, so we can plan for those to make sure that there's enough interchange between the bulk grid and the distribution grid, not only to provide electricity into the system, but to the extent to which there is vehicle electrification, we start seeing vehicle-to-grid technology, where all those batteries that are stored in those electric vehicles can actually be a source of supply after sunset when the grid gets really stressed, particularly during those hot September nights that you talked about. So there's a tremendous planning challenge to anticipate and coordinate between the bulk grid and the distribution system.
Anything you want to add on heat pumps, whereas we're talking about temperature onto the grid?
Yeah, I mean, it really is. I mean, and I know we can kind of go there, but I think the grid, built, over 120 odd years, really for conventional technologies with significant amount of fuel diversification. As we bring all this new electricity demand onto the system, whether it's vehicles or heating or commercial residential usages, we really have now begun to stretch the physical and institutional capacity of the grid to its breaking point. And I think we're now at the point of trying to figure out how are we going to reimagine that and put all these pieces back together in a very different configuration.
And then before you get too intimidated by the idea that we're breaking the grid, we're about to break the grid with something else. So Amazon is one of, I don't know whether the stats are published, we're one of the largest, or we may claim to be the largest operator of data centers in the world through Amazon Web Services, which is a meaningful portion of our electrical load. Something that we've made great progress to, sorry, we're getting feedback. That we've made great progress to bring down to zero carbon. So we made a commitment to be 100% renewable by 2030. And in fact, we then revised that target to be 100% renewable by 2025, and we're going to hit that target. We're over 85% renewable today, meaning that Amazon is the largest corporate purchaser of renewable energy in the world. And I think we're like the 5th largest purchaser of renewables, including major utilities like Chinese utilities in purchasing renewables. So I think we've got like 22 gigawatts that we have publicly announced under contract, and we've actually contracted more than that. But wait, enter generative AI. And so you think that data centers use a lot of power? To run those large language models, both on the ingestion of data and then ultimately on the processing, is staggering. And we are of the belief, we're just seeing the trends, the need for the incorporation of large language models and generative AI in everything, right? People are not going to be satisfied with Alexa. Alexa is not smart enough. People want to have a real conversation with Alexa, Siri, every one of their web browsers, and probably their refrigerator and washing machine at some point in time. Yeah. The data centers to operate that are going to break the grid if the vehicles and the production of fuel don't.
Wow. So EVs, heat pumps, and data centers.
Yeah. No, and it when you think about planning for all that, it really comes down to, a couple of things. First of all, we know, I think everybody recognizes in this country, and you mentioned having a great federal partner in the Biden administration, incredible focus on transmission infrastructure in this country, well overdue. And so even though we don't have the answers to a lot of those questions, what are the fuel supply sources going to be, what's the total demand, we're in the process right now of really trying to get back ahead of the curve in terms of building some transmission. Not only is that a physical infrastructure play with big financial, capital requirements, but we're also recognizing that the regulatory framework for managing the queues to get onto the system has been completely broken. Any of you that pay attention to policy at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission recognize that FERC is now looking back to the mid-90s and saying, this first come, first serve queuing process is not working. And so we have an opportunity to try to reimagine what that looks like so we can get 10,000 megawatts of resources onto the grid every year and kind of eliminate that queue congestion. And then third of all, just particularly in the West, grids are giant portfolios. And you sort of get back to basic finance. You want to basically manage these portfolios with reasonably uncorrelated assets, right? And so when I talk about the West, we're fortunate to have a very diverse set of resources across the West. The big hydro up in the Northwest, and the solar down in the desert Southwest, and kind of the Intermountain has its own unique resources. And trying to leverage that diversity and breaking down the institutional balkanization that exists between all these individual system operators and come up with a new governance model for the grid is also necessary. So you have physical limitations, you have regulatory distortions, and you have basic governance changes that all need to be taken on yesterday so that we can lay the groundwork for the kind of demand management that Daniel is talking about.
Because the only way we get to that 2035 decarbonized grid target is to bring all of that zero carbon resource from where it's produced to where it's needed.
That's right, and it's going to take a real combination of distributed technology. I'm a big believer in whether it's rooftop solar or distributed batteries, we're going to need all of that bidirectional. But just the bulk grid requirements. And we actually talked, Daniel and I talked a little bit over lunch too. Nuclear has really had a lot of challenges in this country. We are going to need incredible zero carbon fuel density. And right now, to power all these server farms, and not to mention the AI generation, we don't have that yet. So thinking about small modular nuclear reactors, thinking about other forms of baseload dispatchable capacity, and the associated transmission infrastructure is something that we've just really got to take on with incredible energy right now.
So you said something, and I don't know, to be bombastic, I kind of want to dispute it, but maybe I'll just do an which is that we need to be bringing this generating capacity to the places where there is load. So we need to build a ton of transmission, and that requires kind of an enormous amount of work and interstate collaboration, the likes of which that we've not seen, at least since the construction of the interstate highway system. But the other alternative is really what we need to do is bring some of our load, some of our new industry to the areas that are actually blessed with renewable energy. And I believe what we're going to start to see is a resurgence in the economies in places like North and South Dakota, in places that have been very hard hit by kind of changes in the economic structure of our country, where when building a new steel mill, I mean, what do you need? You need probably access to iron deposits and very low cost energy if you're going to be replacing blast furnaces and basic oxygen furnaces with electric arc furnaces and something that is zero carbon. Where should you be? Probably near iron ore deposits in northern Minnesota or North Dakota. And so one of the things that's kind of fascinating about my own remit is, as a very large consumer of practically everything, we can offer the sort of demand signals, or together with other large corporate buyers, to do the, it's not just if you build it, we will come. We demand that you move your manufacturing capacity to a place where it makes sense to do that. And I think that we are going to see like a recombination of that. Otherwise, we're stuck with things of like power that can't be evacuated from solar projects in parts of California and Texas, where the grid is so constrained. They're building Bitcoin mining operations to make use of that power. I mean, it's just so ridiculous and destructive.
The only way you get embodied carbon out of the system is to move the supply to the cleaner source.
Yeah.
Right. Wow. So let's get back to some of the DERs. Elliot, I want you to talk about the September 2022 thing that happened in California. It's fascinating in terms of how you all dealt with it.
Yeah. Well, I joined the CAISO in the fall of 2020, which was about 6 weeks after we had our first rotating outages in the West in years and years and years. And I talked about correlations and lack of correlation. The problem then was you had a heat wave that literally stretched across the entire Western United States. We just kind of ran out of gas. Well, we learned a lot of lessons from that. And over the course of 2021 and going into 2022, we brought a ton of new resources on board, including about 4,000 megawatts of 4-hour lithium-ion batteries, excuse me, a lot of new solar, and also a tremendous amount of additional communication coordination between the ISO, the utilities and state agencies, but we got into the first week of September, and I know we had a chance to talk about it. It was, you know, you could physically feel the climate signal. I mean, it was 117 degrees in Sacramento, California, and the whole West was just baking. We had the all-time record demand for electricity in the West United States, 167,500 megawatts on September 6th. And we got into the early part of the afternoon, and thermal units started tripping off, and the temperatures were just inexorable. And we just basically were dispatching all the resources. And as we got into the early evening, we brought the batteries online, and the temperatures just kept holding. And finally, after exhausting literally every megawatt of supply and pretty much every megawatt of predetermined demand response, we had a conversation with the governor's office, and Governor Newsom elected to trigger basically an Amber Alert. He put out a cell phone message to 27 million Californians. Wow. And I don't know if you guys ever heard that sound, right? That is not a pleasant sound when that goes off, right? It's kind of the sound of panic, and no way to run a grid or a railroad. But within about 15 or 20 minutes, we saw over 1,500 megawatts of load reductions. And we're just watching the screen, you know, just watching, and suddenly, just as that load drops off, the reserves started to restore, and we took the grid right from the brink of rotating outages and managed to ride through that, brought a little bit more supply on the batteries, and worked our way through the stage to emergency. So it was just a physical manifestation, not only of just what the climate signal is doing right now. It's scary, right? But also the physical interdependence that exists amongst all those resources, and probably most importantly, the role of demand flexibility. I love, you know, Daniel's notion about taking new industries to the places where the resources exist. The role of demand response in our industry is also absolutely critical, particularly for the needle peaks. And there's so much opportunity for innovation and automation in that space. And I'm really hopeful that, you know, 3, 4, 5 years from now, particularly in California, if we get in a situation like that, we'll basically be able to issue a dispatch instruction and get about 4,000 or 5,000 megawatts of that pulled out of people's thermostats, and they're automated without them even noticing it. So yeah.
Well, hopefully you'll be able to say, Alexa, turn down my thermostat, and then we'll take care of it.
Right, exactly. Or Alexa will have been programmed well in advance to say, hey, price are $1,000, demands of 52K. I'm going to cycle off for 15 minutes. Nobody notices, no problem. Lights stay on. Grid operators out of the news, and we move on, right?
There we go. Yeah. All right, so Chatham House rules.
Yeah.
So what do you prefer, DERs or centralized generation? If you had to pick.
You know, I don't want to be cute. I mean, I think you literally need both of them. I think you need all the systems. I mean, the DERs are going to be fabulous. We're going to have, you know, thousands and thousands of megawatts out in our grid, but just the sheer demand for electricity, honestly, and the unit costs per megawatt hour delivered, especially with what's happened to the solar energy curve and the wind curve, and batteries are going to experience similar innovation. I think you need the bulk grid as well. So you need everything. And I think that we have to be able to operate at all those different scales. And I think the more that we can also create interoperability between the DERs and the bulk grid, so they can be a source of market. We just actually last week just got it's known for those you know, policy junkies out there, the Order 2222 tariff, the DER tariff. We just got with CAISO, we were the first ISO of the United States to have a fully compliant Order 2222 tariff. So we're ready to go, but you need it all, right?
That's right.
I defer to Elliot. I didn't make a choice. Yeah, I'd say for selfish reasons, as the operator of data centers that need 24/7 reliability, I'm going to go with central generation.
All right. Fair enough. All right.
More decisive answer.
That had to be something, you know.
All right. So we're going to switch gears. We're going to start to look out now. Let's look at 2050, and let's dig in a little bit more to some new advanced technologies. And Daniel, you were teeing us up a little bit earlier around green hydrogen. So just so you know, we are in the fuel cell state. We have a very strong, as the governor indicated, aerospace industry here, which over the last 6 decades has led to, you know, the Apollo space mission having electrolyzers, you know, water going into hydrogen, hydrogen going into the fuel cell to power the space station. So I'd be interested to know what you think about green hydrogen. What are some of the risks? What are some of the opportunities? I mean, are we going to be pumping this stuff into the natural gas system? Like, how is this going to work?
Yeah, God, that's such a big question.
Yeah.
So no, we're not going to be able to pump it into the natural gas system because hydrogen is corrosive, and the existing natural gas pipeline system can't take it in significant volume. Somewhere between 1% and maybe at most 5% of what actually goes through that pipes could be hydrogen and not methane. Other than that, you actually need new pipelines. Let's see, there are a few things that are going to happen. When you are commingling hydrogen together with methane, something else that needs to become better developed is the system for who gets to claim that they have hydrogen versus methane, and that ultimately what you're withdrawing on the other end is commingled.
Trading systems, yeah.
And so those kind of book and claim systems that enable people, the establishment of, like we have renewable energy credits, right? Tradable credits for renewable energy. We're going to need the same thing for renewable diesel, for electrofuels. They're starting to exist for sustainable aviation fuel, but all of those things are going to have to come. So these are like not just technology solutions, but policy market solutions to help make it happen. So I think that transporting hydrogen is actually more likely to be moved in a liquid phase than a gaseous phase. Either cryo-cooled hydrogen, which is very power hungry, or turning hydrogen into ammonia, which I have a good friend who describes ammonia as hydrogen in a nitrogen suitcase, which I think is like a lovely metaphor, right? You just have to put it in something to make it more transportable. So NH3,
That's how you get from point A to point B.
that is exactly how you get it from point A to point 3, and then you have to strip it again and operate it as hydrogen, although you can operate some natural gas plants on ammonia. The challenge with ammonia is going to be, like, it kills people if it leaks, and it explodes. That said, don't mean to burst your bubble. Does anyone know what the most dangerous spot in New Haven is? It's the Whale, because how is the ice rink cooled? Ammonia. Like, if that blows, we're in trouble here. Yeah. Good to know.
Things to know.
Yeah. I am more bullish on seeing hydrogen for transportation uses and for fuel, whether that is for fuel cell-based vehicles or vehicles that, as I mentioned before, recombine that hydrogen into some kind of synthetic fuel, synthetic hydrocarbon that burns like aviation fuel, like kerosene or like diesel. I think that it's going to be a long time before we're seeing that hydrogen for power generation, because when you go from renewable to electrolyzer to hydrogen to ammonia, back to hydrogen, and then into a fuel cell, the losses are insane. And the cost of all of that CapEx is not supportable. So I think that that's going to be a while.
Yeah. You know, I'll probably invoke the hope over experience on green hydrogen. I mean, from a grid perspective, it would be absolutely fabulous to have that technology show up. And, you know, Mitsubishi and others have already started developing, you know, dual burner gas turbines that can run on a combination of green hydrogen or just any hydrogen and natural gas. Actually, there's a project out in Utah that's managed. It's an old coal-fired power plant, actually, that serves a lot of load in Los Angeles. And Los Angeles, of course, has taken on really, really aggressive decarbonization targets. And what they're doing is they actually have a big salt cavern right out there near this coal plant that they can use for hydrogen storage. And they have a decent solar resource. And so they're going to electrolyze hydrogen, and they're going to retrofit this coal plant into a dual burning gas plant and then use the existing transmission infrastructure to wheel clean electricity. And as the hydrogen gets more and more sophisticated, lower cost over time, they'll change the relative balance of natural gas and hydrogen in that project. So I think it's going to be really situational, but there will be certain applications where that kind of technology doesn't have to go through so many different fuel cycles like Daniel was describing.
And I think in terms of being situational or being local, the place where I would keep my eye is actually in the Persian Gulf. So controlling a significant portion of the world's liquid fuel supplies has been a good business for a number of Gulf nations, and they're not going to let that go so easily. And so there's a tremendous amount, like if you hang out in Abu Dhabi or Riyadh, there's a ton of investment activity right now, basically in like covering the Sahara Desert with solar panels to power electrolyzers. Where you're going to get water in the Sahara Desert is something that Aramco will figure out, in order to then pipeline hydrogen or ammonia or some kind of hydrogen carrier up over Gibraltar and into Europe. They will get there faster than we do in North America, so all eyes are on the Gulf.
I really, honestly, I rely on Daniel. I look at these as sort of the white spaces on the technology map, because he's trying to, decarbonize some very, recalcitrant sectors of the economy. He's having to really lean in and looking for where these new technologies are being. I think that's something that Amazon's going to do us a big favor in, is helping to mainstream, and also given their scale, just the size of demand, being able to really bring to market some of these technologies that hopefully will then show up on the grid and quite frankly help with affordability and equity too. I mean, that's one thing that we have to pay a lot of attention. A lot of the dirtiest old fossil fuel fired power plants in California are in really disadvantaged neighborhoods, and trying to get those resources off the system as quickly as possible is a big part of our challenge. And so being out there on the outer edge of the technology curve and then bringing that home for the rest of us to deploy is going to be super valuable.
Fantastic. All right, so let's go to one more area, and then I think we have time for maybe one or two questions, maybe one. So we're going to push the envelope. We're going to talk about artificial intelligence. So let's go from hardware to software. So I'm a late comer to Chat GPT or all this sort of stuff, but I was watching 60 Minutes 2 weeks ago. I had recorded it. Some of you may have seen Scott Pelley with the Google CEO on an episode, and Scott Pelley asked Bard, to translate a 6-word Ernest Hemingway into an actual story, actually into a full story. And you immediately saw Scott Pelley, and for those of us who remember, I think it was back in 2008 or 2009 when we had the Yale Conference of Governors here, and Scott Pelley was moderating all the governors on climate change. So you actually saw Scott Pelley get emotional when that 6-word story got put into a full story. He asked to put it into a verse, and you almost saw tears in his eyes. And I was like, what is going on with this thing? So I went on to Bard at 2 a.m. watching the show, and Maya Angelou is a big hero of mine. And I said, translate Maya Angelou's 1993 On the Pulse of Morning into 2023. And it translated it, and its final words were, "We are a rock, a river, a tree, we are one." And I immediately got emotional. This is the seminal environmental justice poem of our time, I think. And for whatever that system was to have this sense of humanity and bring it down to that point, I felt like there was an angel that was brought back. Could you use this as an advisor to you, is how I was thinking about it. The next day we ended up using it for levelized cost of energy calculations, and it did really, really well, which was so trippy. But what are your thoughts on like artificial intelligence? I mean, I feel like every day there's a story on it. We need to regulate this thing.
Yeah. So funny, again, lunch conversation today, pseudocognition, the definition of humanity. What does it mean to actually communicate beyond pattern recognition to true intelligence? I mean, we're all trying to figure this out. The demand, unbelievable. For me, I feel like I'm sort of every other person right now trying to figure out whether this is some sort of colossal threat to survival, or whether it's going to be a tool that fundamentally transforms our way of living, but is ultimately beneficial. I think in the short term, on a very prosaic basis, that pattern recognition capability, the ability to identify uncertainty and characterize it into bullets of intuition, is going to be very valuable for the electricity system, right? In terms of, think about all the volatility and uncertainty that we have on our system. I think it can take complex technical questions and wrap it into very intuitive language pretty quickly. That could speed up study timelines. So I think there are some ways that it can really help the grid. But in terms of what it's ultimately, its electricity demand and what it means for interpersonal communication, I'm a little spooked at the moment.
Yeah, I'm particularly I'm spooked by two things. One, I'm spooked by the fact that we don't really understand the rules that it's teaching itself. The fact that it's based on pattern recognition, that it can sometimes lead to hallucination, but that ultimately, the Tesla on autopilot learns to drive by observing people driving over millions of miles in millions of different situations. But how does it learn whether to swerve away from the old person and into a baby carriage, or away from the baby carriage and into an old person? Those are rules that are controversial if someone programs them, but if they're just developed through observation, we don't even know what those rules are and how many of them are embedded in ways that may ultimately be threatening. I think that is scary to me. The other thing that's scary to me is these systems are, kind of trained to optimize for whatever they're trying to optimize, and they can fool us with emotion, right? They can write a Maya Angelou-inspired poem that can move you to tears, and so you sort of believe that they're operating in our best interests, and they may be able to continue to feel that way until, like, on a turn of the dime, it's clear that they're not. They're optimizing for something else that we didn't realize, and it's too late to stop it. So that sounds a little Isaac Asimov-y, but that's my big fear. But in the meantime, there's amazing stuff that we can do with them. Also, just in terms of predictive reasoning that comes from pattern recognition, things like lower impact mining for resources that are incredibly important to the energy transition, that are coming from conflict nations, or like finding new cobalt supplies using AI to apply a set of pattern recognition that no geologist in the world could do in order to tease them out of places that aren't in the Congo. That kind of thing is extraordinary. So, man, it's a mixed bag.
Fascinating. Yeah. All right, so that was a good lead to our next presentation, but closing thoughts. Elliot.
I was thinking about there's been two references to the whale today. One is, I think, the most dangerous place on campus. Also the place that we actually had our graduation ceremony, because it was pouring rain on the day of graduation. So I've logged some time in the whale, and I remember back in 1998 sitting, I can just so remember sitting there during the graduation ceremony and actually having the thoughts, the world is my oyster. I just felt so fortunate that there was such opportunity and been part of such a great community. And I think 25 years later, given everything we've learned, and also why we're here, on this climate threat, the climate crisis is real. And I feel today it's changed from the world is my oyster to the world is fraught with opportunity. And I just feel so fortunate to be part of this community, to have friendships like I've had with Daniel. Bryan, your accomplishments and your contributions have been amazing. And I just feel wonderful to know that, just like we saw earlier today, we're still developing and growing the next generation of unbelievable Yale talent that's just going to continue to change the world. So hats off to all of you as well. And thanks for having me. It's been great being here.
Fantastic. Thank you.
So I have the great privilege of also teaching at Yale. And so I feel like I know a significant number of people in every joint degree cohort from when we graduated to the present. I'm like the institutional knowledge, because I teach this big lecture course. And so I love the sense of, I'd say, like, people are still young and naive enough to be optimistic about what they can do, and that energizes me. But something that given that I spend a lot of time with people who are really jaded, something that I used to do is, in part of my role, was connect people, because of the power of the Yale community and the sense in which everyone wants to have that kind of green Davos experience of helping each other. But then, like, the number of people who had taken my class was, it was too difficult to do it. And so I created this LinkedIn group for people who had taken my class. They had common experience, let them find each other. Someone wants to work in electric vehicles, you can find the person who graduated 4 years ago from electric vehicles. And the rule that I lay out for everyone in the class, which is a thing that I'll leave everyone with here, is pay it forward. That the idea is, if you join that community and you reach out to that network to find a lead for a job, find a consultant, get an answer to a question, whatever it is, 2 years later, when someone reaches out to you, take that call and be there from them. And I think if we all acknowledge the community that we're in, are there for each other, and pay it forward, we'll solve this.
That's great. That's great. I want to leave one final concluding remark as well, which is that I think our nation is in a moment of transition. I feel like we're moving towards, or moving from maximizing the amount of greenhouse gas emission reductions per dollar of investment to maximizing the amount of investment in low income and disadvantaged communities per ton of carbon reduced. So I really feel like we're getting to that nexus of climate justice. We can't have ecology without an adequate anthropology. We can't have environmentalism without humanitarianism. We can't save the trees by avoiding people. So it is fundamentally about loving each other. So just want to leave you with all of that message, and thank you all for being with us in this panel.
Thanks.